Okay,
You want to take a break later? I'll make some coffee and give you some pumpkin pie.
Yeah. So we're here with worshipful brother Dave Woodland, and he is a past master many years ago, and we're here to interview him today for our archive for the Oriental 20 and Scottsdale 43 as well. I'm gonna have worshipful brother Dave just kind of ask you some questions. Obviously, you were born in Atlantic City, New Jersey,
Yep.
in 1925.
Way back then, I had a lot of years to get things done.
Tell us a little about your childhood. How, when you as a child, what were some of the things you did as a child back then?
Well, I was born in 25. It wasn't quite the Depression yet until Depression started in 29, 30. So I grew up during the Depression. My father, fortunately, had a business, and in terms of today's money, he made nothing, but we survived nicely. And they bought the house when I was born. I grew up, it was 2 blocks from the beach, Atlantic Ocean. Atlantic City is, and still is, a seaside resort, now concentrated with gambling. And beach and ocean was a way of life. There was no problem. Go down there with my mother and my older brother, spend the day, and walk home. It was very nice. When I got somewhat older, and I went to local schools, of course, and at 11, my brother and I formed a business working on the beach. A lot of people would come down from Philadelphia and they would rent a house and stay the summer, and the father would still be in Philadelphia, so women had trouble carrying their beach chairs and stuff, so we had a business. We would carry their beach chairs and set them up for them and charge them so much a week for each item. And we did that for a number of years. So I really started work when I was 11 years old. About the time I got to be 16, I got a job in the movie theater, and I was an usher for about a week, and they promoted me to barker. A barker is an old carnival expression. I would stand outside the theater on the boardwalk and just had a spiel going, welcome to this cool air-conditioned theater, blah, 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 plenty of seating. It was a big theater, seated like 5,400 people. And the city was occupied by the Air Force basic training. They took over all the hotels, and there were a couple of big hospitals taking wounded veterans from World War II, namely those who lost their limbs. So I worked in that movie theater. Actually, I worked for the Miss America pageant that year as a usher or whatever. And I left that job, went to work on the Steel Pier, which is still in existence, but not the way it was. It was a huge place. It went a half a mile out into the ocean, had 3 theaters, a ballroom that got nothing but the big name bands. So you pay one admission and spend the day there, eat your lunch there. You see 3 movies, vaudeville show, dance to big bands, go through the fun houses. And if you got out of there in 10 hours for the one small admission, you got out of there fast. I got a job there as a disc jockey. And just before you go in, there was a glass booth in the lobby with 4 78 players, which I had to keep going. A 78 record lasted between 2 and 2.5 minutes. And I had to keep, it's like the guy in the circus with the dishes on the, spinning the dishes on the poles. And they wouldn't let me make any noise changing the record, so I had to turn the volume down, change the record, turn the volume up, and see, it was hair-raising, but the best job I ever had. It was fun. And people used to stand and look inside the glass booth at some guy changing records. I don't know why, but that's what I did. That was 1942 and early 43. At that point, I was a senior in high school. And we're getting close to graduation, but I quit school and joined the Navy. Why did I join the Navy? I was a draft dodger. I didn't want to be drafted, so I enlisted. What the draft allowed was, if you're 18 years old and still in high school, they let you graduate. The 1st of July, the rest of the guys in high school all left drafted. I mean, the whole graduating class, the male half of the graduating class, went in 1st of July of 1943. But I beat them out and joined the Navy. Glad I did. So we're up to there now. I don't know how far you want to go from here.
So you were drafted, then you went to boot camp.
Yeah, I wasn't drafted, I enlisted.
I'm sorry, you enlisted, then you went to boot camp.
Went to boot camp at the beginning of June in 1943. Boot camp lasted 6 weeks at that point, during which you had an opportunity to select what you might want to do later in the Navy. Interesting thing happened to me. It was about 10 days into boot camp, and I got a notice to report to such a building. I went there, and there were 50 guys there. They had no idea what was going on, and they said, "You 50 guys got the highest scores in the aptitude test. So we want to send you to the University of Chicago to learn radar." And we said, "What's radar?" Now, I just gotten out of high school. I wanted no more school. How bright are you at 17 anyway? So I messed up the test and didn't go. Biggest mistake I ever made. They asked me what job I would like to have in the Navy, and like a fool, I volunteered to go in submarine service. I was turned down because I wore glasses. They said, "All right, put me on a PT boat." Got turned down for the same reason. That's the two best things that happened to me. So I volunteered to learn torpedo work, and I spent 4 months in torpedo school in the same place. I took boots. And then they transferred me to San Diego for 2 more months. A trip to San Diego from Rhode Island was horrendous. They were supposed to give you a Pullman berth on a civilian train or put you on a troop train and send you cross country. They gave me a coach ticket and said, "Get there the best way you can."
Wow.
And that was between Christmas and New Year's in 1943, when there was no gasoline, people weren't driving. The only thing it could take, and it wasn't air travel, the only thing you could take was a train. So I remember I got on a train in North Philadelphia and stood way past Pittsburgh. And finally, somehow I kept trading seats with a GI. I'd sit for 2 hours, he would sit for 2 hours. We got to Chicago, and we had to change stations. And when we got to the other station, it was so crowded they wouldn't let you in the train station. So we just bullied our way in, and bullied our way out to the tracks. And they said, "There's no more room on the train, you can't go anywhere."
Were these all GI guys on the train, or they're just...
Yeah, mostly.
Mostly.
But there was a lot of civilians too.
Yeah.
There's some big old Army sergeant reached out the window and pulled me up and threw the window into the train. That's how I got on a train. I stood all the way to Kansas City.
You stood outside the train while it was moving?
In
between,
the aisle.
in the aisle, okay.
Yeah. Well, it got to be close to midnight, and now it's December in the Midwest, it's cold.
Oh, jeez.
And I rented a pillow for a quarter from the porter, and I went to sleep between cars. It was bitter cold. I woke up maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I got back to the club car and went to sleep on top of the bar because it was closed. 6 o'clock, they aroused me out of there. They got to clean. Anyhow, and we got to Kansas City, and they put on a couple extra cars, and we squeezed our way into that. And I looked at the car. I mean, it was old. It was red plush seats, hard as this floor. And I saw a fire axe up there. It said 1897.
Wow.
the seats weren't wide enough for 3 people. And now there were 3 of us kind of hanging out together. And we shared this seat. 2 of us could sit and 1 could stand. No food. There was guys selling sandwiches that he always sold out in the first car, and we were about the 5th car. We had nothing to eat. We got into New Mexico in the desert, and there was some kind of accident ahead of us. We sat there for 6 hours, and somebody saw a town on the horizon. And like lemmings, the whole train emptied out. And everybody went to this little town trying to find food. Well, I stayed on the train to keep our seat. And they said they went into the general store and cleaned it out. I mean, they took anything. Cans of beans or whatever and they brought me back something, I don't know what it was. We eventually got to Los Angeles and grabbed a hotel, get showered, whatever we had to do. Went out on the town and then collapsed. Reported it into San Diego the next morning. Well, I came from the East Coast where winter is winter. And what's it doing warm in the middle of winter? That's not right. There's something wrong with this. And the first meal I got, they put down what I thought was a nice green pear in the middle of a plate. I took a bite out of it. I didn't know what an avocado was. And it was terrible as far as I'm concerned. The worst pear I ever ate. And I have not touched an avocado since.
Wow.
I can't stand the sight of it. Ridiculous.
So you don't eat guacamole?
I won't eat guacamole either. I went to advanced torpedo school there for 2 months. That was January to February of '44. And it was interesting. We went to school at night. We had our dinner at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We went from 6 till 1 in the morning, which was great because we could sleep late. We had no reveille.
So 6 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock in the morning?
No, 6 o'clock
at
night
okay.
till 1 o'clock in the morning. And we were in a shack, 26 people in a small shack, because they didn't have enough room in the barracks. And it was on the dock where the ships left every day for Pacific War. Every day they would fill up ships with GIs and Marines, and they would go off.
Wow.
One morning, I woke up, and the whole world was shaking. I said, what's going on? I went to the door, and our shack was about 50 feet in the air. They said they needed the rooms, they were moving them with a crane. And the only connection was electric. They cut the electric. There was no plumbing. And we were traveling down the wharf.
On
the
the
guys
crane.
are still in their bunks. I close the door and says, don't take the first step. Every Friday night, we would get on a bus and go to Los Angeles, go to Hollywood, do the tourist thing, and take the train back on Monday morning. Then we actually got on a troop train to come back in early March of '44, and we went to Norfolk, Virginia, and formed a crew for a new destroyer escort. Destroyer escorts were built along the lines of a destroyer, but there were it's like the difference between a Honda Civic and a Cadillac. They both did the same job. But the destroyer escorts, instead of being riveted and armored, were made out of 3/16 metal and welded and produced like popcorn. It was a Model T Ford of Navy ships. They wanted them for escort duty in the Atlantic and relieved the destroyers for combat duty. And that worked fine. The first ones were diesel electric, then the next ones were all diesel, and finally they got to our class and they were steam. We had half the power of a full destroyer. We were about 50 feet shorter. We were heavily armed, and from then on they ceased to be escort vessels. They became first line vessels, combat ships. So we formed our crew in Norfolk, and we went to Houston, Texas, and our ship had been launched and christened, and we went aboard and became the crew. We went to Bermuda for a shakedown, and we tried out everything, fire the guns, fire the torpedoes, learn things. We were there for about 3 weeks, and we were scheduled to go to Boston Navy Yard. And we got up steam to leave. We were going to try a speed run, see how fast we could get there. All of a sudden, here comes a ship towing a submarine. What's this? The submarine was captured off the coast of North Africa, a German submarine. The first ship that was captured since the Civil War.
Are these the U-boats?
U-boat.
Yeah.
It was a U-boat. The first one captured since the Civil War. And they reported it sunk because they got the code, the Enigma machine. They got all their code work, the machine to decode it, and then they reported we had sunk it, but they didn't sink it. They towed it to Bermuda, put it attached to our ship, and we towed this German submarine all the way to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, 2 days. It stayed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire until after the war, when it was actually floated to Chicago. It's in the Science Museum in Chicago on permanent display.
Wow.
And everybody from Chicago I've ever met has been through that submarine.
I heard that during the war, those were the toughest submarines to catch. We lost a lot of ships.
They had so many of them.
Yeah, and the Brits lost a lot of ships too, trying to catch these guys.
They sank ships 3-4 miles off the beach where I lived. Our town was in a permanent blackout. I used to go to work. Oh yeah, and before I went to Steel Pier, I worked at a movie theater for a few months on the boardwalk. And the town was blacked out. My brother had gone into the army, and I had his car, and I could drive to work. I'd get home, get out of work about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was black. The only thing, you had a little spot in your headlights, and the street lights had a little spot coming down. That's because the city with ordinary lights formed a lit backdrop for ships going and coming from New York Harbor. So U-boats used to wait out there. When it went by, boom.
Wow.
There's a whole lot of wrecks out there. The big diving industry going down those wrecks. So we got to Boston, and funny thing happened. We were docked about 4 ships out. There was a dock and a ship, a ship, a ship, a ship. We're out here. And a guy was hooking up a public telephone, a coin-operated telephone, and he hung it up. They started to walk away, and the phone rang. The telephone guy, civilian, answered the phone. He called out my name. Huh? We didn't even know, when we were getting there, why we were there, or whatever. It was my niece, a cousin, a first cousin. She was the admiral's secretary. She said, "Where you been? You're due here 2 days ago." Everybody thought I had something to do with the FBI or something. All right, so we took off from there. Went back to Norfolk for a week or 2, and then we set out for the Pacific. Went through the Panama Canal, and on the way to Pearl Harbor, we burned out one of our steam turbines, and as we pulled into Pearl Harbor, the number of our ship was 415, and we were flagship for 6 DEs, from the 413 to the 418. Yeah. And as we pulled in, the 413 was pulling out. Of course, we had slowed up with a breakdown, and we got there late, and they left without us. They went out and ran into the Battle of not Linguin Gulf, but in the Philippines, a very big battle, where Halsey had the famous turkey shoot. And there was the biggest battleship Japan had, the Yamato, which had 17.5-inch guns on it. And the only ship with torpedoes was this little 415 DE. And some admirals ordered the 413 to go sink the Yamato.
Mm-hmm.
The Yamato fired one salvage from the guns and the 413 disappeared. Just ripples on the surface.
Wow.
And then the 414 went, and we were there about 5 weeks and had a good time in Hawaii. And we got out there in time for the Battle of Linguin Gulf. Well, the first one was the Battle of Philippine Sea, right? So we hit the Battle of Linguin Gulf and the invasion of Luzon. And then we did that, and we went up the invasion of Formosa, which is now not Formosa. All the names have changed. The invasion of Formosa, then back to Philippines for the invasion of Mindoro, which is another big island. And in December, we sank a Japanese submarine off the Philippines.
Wow.
And then in April, we were in, this is 1945 now. We were in, Iwo Jima. We were in Iwo Jima for 3 or 4 days before the invasion, and we're there for the whole invasion. We were there about almost 5 weeks. And then next thing was Okinawa. We did the invasion of Okinawa. We were there for 5.5 weeks. And then they formed the Armada, if you will, the invasion forces for the invasion of Japan. And it started with the Navy. They had ships covering the horizon. You couldn't see the beginning and you couldn't see the end of it. There were transports of Army troops that had been in Europe, and all the Navy ships and Marines. We were going to sink Japan. Unfortunately, if we did, it would be probably close to 0.5 to 1 million American casualties, and probably 6 to 8 million Japanese. We didn't want to do it, and we tried everything we could to avoid it. Meanwhile, on July the 6th, we came across another submarine contact, and we sank it. It blew up under us and put us out of commission in a very bad place for almost 8 hours. Broke our steam lines, whatever. We were just bobbing around in the ocean. And of course they lied to us and said, oh, we just sank a submarine mine layer. It turned out to be, Japan had built 4 gigantic submarines, bigger than anything that's ever been built. The first couple were capable of carrying 2 to 3 airplanes. And the last couple would carry 6 or 7.
These are the airplanes are inside the submarines.
They actually had a waterproof hangar on the deck.
Oh, jeez.
They had a catapult with like tracks, which started inside, and the planes were all inside.
Wow.
And then they would surface, and then open the waterproof, and then the planes would be catapulted off the bow. Obviously they're kamikaze because there's no way they can come back.
No.
And the ship we sank, the submarine we sank with the planes on it, was on its way to bomb the Panama Canal to prevent European troops from coming through, make them go all the way around the Horn. They were going to destroy the Gatun locks, which backed up the huge lake. And if those locks were bombed, the whole lake would drain and the canal could never be repaired. The Pacific is 6 feet higher than the Atlantic. And the whole Pacific would just flow backwards into the canal and it would just be the end of Panama Canal. It turns out we saved the Panama Canal so Jimmy Carter could give it away, but that's what happened.
Well, now they're working on a new project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in August, they dropped the first atom bomb in Hiroshima. We were
Did you see anything? Did you see
no,
smoke or?
no, we were only 100 miles away, but all we got was radio reports. And anyway, it was a big bomb. That's all we.
Oh yeah.
That's all we knew about it. Then they dropped the second one. Then on August the 15th, it was the 14th here. They said the war's over. Japanese gave up. They, we were happy. And I was doing what I usually did. I had a wire brush. I'm getting rust off of things. Of course, my idea of celebration, I took the wire brush and threw it into the ocean as far as I could throw it. Then we went to Korea. We were the first ship into Korea. It was a day after the surrender. The Russians had already been there. The Russians sacked South Korea. Anything that they could take away with them, they took and gave to North Korea. What they couldn't take, they broke. The officers had gone ashore and saw all this. We never got ashore. And why they were surprised 5 years later, there was a war in Korea. The war in Korea started the day
After the surrender?
Yeah, sure it did. I mean, whether it was declared or not, the Russians were there. They mobilized the North Koreans, gave them all their whatever they needed. Then they went into Manchuria. You don't hear too much about this. The Russians went Russians and North Koreans went into Manchuria, mobilized them, armed them, and said the Americans are coming to kill you. Okay, we didn't know about that. Our next duty was with the admiral who was in charge of the occupation of the Asian coast. He was on a big ship and we were in front of him. And we're going all around the North China Sea, which was heavily mined. The idea being the mine would hit us and not his ship. So we went into a lot of Chinese ports. He would inspect them, get back on a ship. And then one day we went around the end of the Chinese wall and we were in Manchuria. Okay, another port. He got in his boat and he was halfway to shore when the Manchurians opened up with machine guns. They were first shots of the Cold War. With just him and us.
Wow.
Because the Americans were coming to kill him. That's what they were told. So they were firing at us. We tried another port up a river further, the same thing happened. And the river was too narrow for us to turn around. All we had was an old Japanese chart. And we saw a fork in the river, we went up there and turned around and got out of there like a speedboat. And we made a visit to Shanghai in November, the day after Thanksgiving.